Portland, Oregon wakes gently, like an artist brushing soft watercolors across the sky. The mornings are cool, rain-washed, poetic without trying. Local cafes breathe life into the city, brick walls, hand-painted murals, and windows blurred slightly by overnight drizzle. In one such cafe, there is a table that never changes. Not because it was reserved, but because someone always returned to it. Caleb Rowan sat at the corner table every morning at 7 a.m., a man in his early 40s, shaped by experience, not urgency. His black coffee never needed sugar, and his notebook never needed an audience. He carried calm, the way old trees carried shade in Portland parks, quietly, steadily, without asking to be admired. And then there was Clara Bennett. She was approaching 40, living in the thoughtful space between heartbreak and healing. Her life had taught her caution, but also depth. She didn't enter the cafe for connection, she entered for quiet, a place to breathe before facing the day. Yet somewhere along the way, Caleb's constant presence became part of the backdrop she subconsciously leaned on. Two adults, not exchanging words, but sharing a rhythm. A silent understanding built not from conversations, but from consistency. Because over time, his routine became the quiet background music to her healing, steady, respectful, emotionally intelligent without speaking at all. At 7:02 a.m., she would notice him in her peripheral vision. At 7:05, her coffee would be stirred just a little slower. And if the clock dared cross 7:10 with his chair still empty, her day would tilt, just slightly. A tiny emotional tremor. A subtle proof of connection she didn't plan for. Not the explosive kind of love, the quieter kind, the grown-up kind. The kind that forms in familiarity, not frenzy. And in a world obsessed with chaos and rush, their story began with the most radical thing of all. Consistency. A man who showed up. A woman who noticed. And a cafe table that witnessed it all before either of them understood the shape of what was forming. Sometimes love arrives like lightning. But sometimes, especially later in life, it arrives at 7 a.m., sits in a familiar corner, and waits patiently to be recognized. And that recognition is always worth the wait. Clara Bennett had learned, over nearly 4 decades, that life had a way of testing patience and trust. Betrayals in love, friendships that quietly frayed, and years of working harder than anyone seemed to notice had left their marks. Her heart had become careful, protective, a quiet, well-fortified place where only a few people were ever allowed in. The cafe had become her sanctuary. Not because it was remarkable, but because it was constant. Brick walls that remembered every conversation, the faint smell of roasted coffee beans lingering in the corners, the gentle hum of morning conversations, all of it provided a small, steady rhythm to counter the chaos of the world outside. She came early, before the rush, not noticing at first that she wasn't alone in appreciating the stillness. Caleb Rowan had stumbled into the same routine years earlier, though his story was different. He had spent much of his adult life chasing goals, building career milestones, and carrying responsibilities that often left little space for reflection. His marriage had ended quietly a decade ago, amicable in conversation but jagged in memory. A daughter now grown lived mostly with her mother, leaving him with long mornings and an ache he didn't talk about. He sought refuge in small routines, things that felt personal and unshakable: his corner table, his black coffee, a notebook where he jotted observations about life, small insights, fleeting thoughts, sketches even. Their routine began quietly, as routines often do, unnoticed, almost accidental. Clara had first entered the cafe one rainy morning, umbrella dripping, head full of deadlines and regrets, and had chosen the table near the window. She didn't realize at the time that a man was already seated in the same corner, quietly sipping coffee, flipping through a notebook, occasionally pausing to watch the rain on the street outside. Days passed, weeks passed. She began to notice a pattern. Every morning, 6:55 Clara arrives, and Caleb was always there, by 7 a.m., never intrusive, never demanding attention. And she, too, returned every morning at roughly the same time. The synchronicity was subtle at first, a gentle noticing, a half-smile when their eyes met briefly, the quiet reassurance of another presence in her otherwise solitary mornings. Clara found herself wrestling with unexpected emotions. She was careful by nature, yet she felt the strange comfort of someone else's constancy. It was not a dramatic love at first sight, nor a sudden obsession. It was a quiet recognition that some lives, when aligned, could heal in silence. Still, doubt crept in. What if I'm imagining safety in someone who's just a stranger? She wondered. Her mind ran through all the betrayals, the disappointments, the years of expecting chaos from people she trusted. For Caleb, the routine was equally comforting. He had long ago resigned himself to the quiet companionship of observation. He did not know her name, but there was something grounding about seeing the same face every morning, a shared rhythm in two lives that otherwise moved separately. Over time, he began to anticipate her arrival, a subtle shift in attention when he enters the door and sees her sitting. And so it went, for months, two people, parallel yet intertwined, sharing a quiet corner of a cafe in Portland, each carrying their pasts, each fighting the delicate, unspoken pull of connection. Clara came seeking calm. Caleb came seeking routine. Neither expected that, in the small rituals of morning coffee and muted conversation, they would find something that began to feel like hope. Hope that trust could grow again. Hope that hearts, even the cautious and wounded, could quietly notice one another and feel seen. Some mornings, it was the smallest gestures that spoke the loudest. Clara stirred her coffee absently, staring out at the rain-blurred streets, carrying the weight of a week that had been harsher than most. Without a word, Caleb slid an extra napkin across the table toward her, just enough that she noticed, just enough to feel a quiet reassurance. He didn't speak, nor did he intrude. Yet in that fleeting motion, she felt the softest echo of understanding. Someone had noticed her, someone cared, even without saying it. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But to Clara, it meant everything. She felt a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, a sense of safety she had thought was long gone. And yet, along with it came uncertainty. Was she reading too much into a simple act? Or was this a person who had learned to pay attention, really pay attention, without expectation? The days continued. Her rhythm and his rhythm slowly intertwined, each aware of the other in ways neither fully acknowledged. And then, one week, something changed. Caleb began leaving the cafe precisely at 7:30 a.m., a small deviation from the unspoken routine that had anchored her mornings for months. Clara noticed immediately. Her heart clenched without reason. Was he avoiding her? Had she misread the meaning behind the quiet gestures, the attentive glance, the napkin left across the table? For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine the worst. Every what-if swirled. What if he didn't feel the same? What if her heart had simply mistaken kindness for connection? And yet, she couldn't help but hope. Because even the smallest details, a pen left uncapped, a notebook open to a half-finished sketch, a hand brushing against a chair, whispered something deeper. Something unspoken, yet unmistakable. Clara realized that the tension, the waiting, the uncertainty, it was all part of something bigger. Something that neither of them had rushed into, something that was quietly growing between them. And in that quiet, bittersweet waiting, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. A fragile hope, yes, but a hope strong enough to make her heart notice, and perhaps, for the first time in years, trust. That morning, the cafe felt different. Clara walked in at 6:55 a.m. As usual. She settled at her favorite table, the cafe smells of roasted coffee and warm pastries wrapping around her as always. At 7 a.m., the familiar chimes sounded, but Caleb didn't appear. 7:02 a.m. 7:05 a.m. 7:10 a.m. Her mind raced. The corner table that had always been his was empty. Her pulse quickened, a small, anxious ache spreading through her chest. Something about the absence of his calm, steady presence made the room feel colder than it should have. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had been delayed. Maybe something urgent had come up. Maybe she was overthinking. But emotion won. Every small gesture he had made over the months, the napkin slid across the table, the brief, attentive glances, the quiet respect for her space, now felt fragile, suspended in uncertainty. By 7:12, she could no longer ignore it. Absence was louder than silence ever was. She gripped her coffee, staring at the empty chair, realizing just how much she had come to care for him, how much she had begun to trust the quiet connection they had built. And in that moment, she understood the truth she hadn't fully admitted to herself. He mattered. More than she had ever allowed herself to feel. Time slowed, each second stretching endlessly, and the cafe, normally a place of comfort, became a room full of tension and longing, a reminder that sometimes, the smallest shifts in routine could make the heart notice what it had been quietly waiting for all along. The cafe door swung open abruptly at 7:20 a.m., letting in a rush of cool morning air. Raindrops clung to the glass, shimmering in the soft light. Caleb entered, slightly breathless, his coat damp from the drizzle outside. He went straight to his usual corner table, eyes scanning briefly, catching Clara's face across the room. She approached him instinctively, her emotions tangled, relief, worry, something warmer she hadn't expected. "Why were you late?" she asked before he could speak, her voice a mixture of exasperation and tenderness. Words tumbled out of her in a rush, the fear she felt when he didn't arrive at 7, the subtle panic in her chest, how empty the cafe felt without his presence. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as if to hold herself together. Without waiting for an answer, she returned to her own table, cheeks flushed, heart pounding. Caleb sat for a moment, overwhelmed, realizing for the first time that the quiet rhythm of their mornings had not belonged to him alone. She had been waiting too, noticing him in all the subtle ways he had unknowingly touched her days. Gently, almost shyly, he picked up his coffee and walked over to her table. He sat down across from her, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. In front of her, he placed a tiny paper bag, unassuming, but heavy with meaning. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, a small charm in the shape of a coffee cup, simple, elegant, handcrafted by a local artisan. It was a token of something new, a beginning, a recognition of mornings shared, a quiet connection that had grown into something significant. Alongside it lay a note, Caleb's handwriting soft, precise, personal. "For the mornings you made brighter without trying." He finally spoke, his voice low, calm, carrying a warmth that made her chest ache. "I wanted to get something small for you, something to thank you, and I lost track of time." Clara looked down at the bracelet, at the note, and then up at him. Her worry melted into something lighter, warmer. Words weren't necessary, the gift, the gesture, the sincerity in his eyes spoke volumes. Clara's fingers brushed the delicate bracelet again, tracing the tiny coffee cup charm. Her chest fluttered in a way she hadn't felt in years, a mixture of awe, relief, and something dangerously close to joy. She looked up at Caleb, her voice trembling almost imperceptibly. Why me? Caleb smiled, soft but certain, eyes steady and warm. Because you stayed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. There were no grand gestures, no fireworks. Just a quiet truth, powerful enough to make everything shift. For the first time, they sat together at the corner table. Same table. Same time. A familiar ritual transformed into a shared moment, a new beginning. The city hummed softly around them, the rain painting the windows, the cafe alive but private somehow, as if the world had narrowed to just this corner, just this moment. Clara's laugh broke gently into the quiet, and Caleb's eyes softened in response. Neither needed to speak more. The gift, the note, the small hours of patient waiting, all had led to this simple, life-changing moment. Some stories don't need fireworks to be unforgettable. Some connections grow quietly, patiently, until one day, you realize your heart has already been waiting there all along. Have you ever found love in a place that felt ordinary, until one person made it extraordinary? Share your 7 a.m. moment in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story of quiet, unexpected connections that changed everything.